Boston glowed that evening with a crisp winter chill in the air, the kind that made every breath hang white against the sky. The restaurants on Boylston Street were alive with chatter, their windows spilling golden light onto the sidewalks. At the corner beneath the arched awning of the city's most exclusive restaurant, Amara Johnson hesitated. She tightened the strap of her borrowed dress, a deep green fabric that clung in places she wished it didn't, and looked down at her son Malik. He was 5, his little suit slightly oversized, his sneakers bright blue against the marble steps. In his hand he clutched a toy astronaut, the plastic scuffed from years of play. "This is never going to work," Amara muttered, tugging her coat closer. "I don't belong in there." Her younger sister Tasha leaned across the driver's seat of the old Honda Civic and grinned. "That's the point. Go in, make him regret agreeing to a blind date, and you're free. Grandma can stop nagging about you being single, and I can stop getting the matchmaking emails." Amara exhaled a long cloud of breath. Their grandmother, relentless and proud, had signed Tasha up on an elite dating site where Boston's most powerful bachelors searched for the right match. Tasha, who had no patience for polished smiles and cocktail parties, decided it would be hilarious if her older sister went in her place. Amara wanted to say no, but rent was due and Grandma's voice had a way of wearing her down. Besides, a free dinner, in a place where she could never afford to step inside, might not be the worst thing. "Mom," Malik whispered, tugging her hand. "Are you scared?" "Not scared," she said, forcing a smile. "Just pretending I'm undercover. Mission operations, scare off a millionaire." She winked, and Malik giggled, saluting with his toy astronaut. The moment she pushed open the glass doors, the air changed. The scent of truffle oil and expensive perfume clung to the velvet-lined lobby. A maitre d' in a crisp tuxedo looked at her from head to toe with a glance too sharp to be accidental. His lips twitched as though he'd swallowed something sour. "Reservation?" He asked, his tone polite, but clipped. Monroe Amara answered, "I'm here to meet Mr. Monroe." His eyes flicked to Malik. "Children aren't usually—" "He's with me," Amara cut in. "If that's a problem, we'll leave." For a beat, the maitre d' considered, then gestured stiffly. "This way." She could feel eyes on her as they crossed the room, tables filled mostly with wealthy white patrons, in tailored clothes, their conversation pausing as though someone had dimmed the music. She had felt this weight before at school conferences and grocery stores on the other side of town, even in office break rooms where she'd once worked. It was the subtle, silent question, "What are you doing here?" Before she could settle, her heel caught on the rug near the entrance. She stumbled forward, and in the chaos, a waiter carrying a tray of drinks lurched to avoid her. Too late. A glass toppled, splashing across the lap of a man seated at the nearest table. "Oh my God!" Amara gasped, reaching instinctively for a napkin. The man stood slowly blotting the front of his tailored charcoal suit. His expression was unreadable, his dark eyes fixed on her like he was calculating the weight of the room. That was him, Daniel Monroe, the elusive CEO. I'm so sorry," she stammered, fumbling with the napkin. "I swear I'm not usually a human wrecking ball." Malik piped up beside her, his voice innocent and piercing in the hush. "Mom, you just attacked him with juice." A ripple of laughter escaped from a nearby table, quickly hushed. Daniel's brow arched. He motioned to the chair across from him. "Please," he said, his voice calm but carrying the sharp authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Sit." Amara slid into the chair, her cheeks burning. Malik climbed up beside her, swinging his small legs. She braced for Daniel to end the evening right there. Instead, he studied her silently, as if he were reading something on her face no one else could see. So she said, forcing brightness into her tone, "Do you always sue people for beverage assaults or just on weekends?" Daniel's mouth twitched so slight she almost missed it. "Was that supposed to be a joke?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, lifting her chin. "I'm funnier when I'm not panicking." Malik leaned across the table. "You look serious, like Uncle James when he hasn't had coffee. Are CEOs made of seriousness?" Daniel blinked, then looked at the boy. "You're 5. 5 years, 2 months, and 11 days, Malik announced proudly, "and I can make popcorn all by myself." Amara buried her face in her hands. "Great. Now tell him I snore too." But Daniel did something she didn't expect. He laughed. Not polite, not restrained. A real warm laugh that seemed pulled from somewhere deep, a sound that startled even him. The waiter hurried over, apologizing, but Daniel waved him away, his eyes never leaving Amara. Something had shifted. She hadn't come to impress anyone. She had come to survive another evening of being reminded of where she didn't belong. But now, across the white linen tablecloth, the city's most reclusive millionaire was laughing because of her, because of Malik, because for once the script had broken. And Amara realized with a chill that she had stepped into more than just a blind date. She had stepped into the opening scene of a story neither of them could predict. The waiter scurried away, leaving behind a trail of awkward silence. Daniel Monroe dabbed at the dark stain on his suit jacket, with the same composure one might use to sign a $1 million deal. His silence stretched across the table like a test, daring Amara to break it. She shifted in her chair, smoothing the fabric of her borrowed dress. "Well," she said finally, "if this was an audition for most disastrous first impression, I think I just won." Daniel's brow lifted, but his eyes betrayed the faintest glimmer of amusement. "You spilled juice," he said evenly, and called it an audition. "That's unusual." "Unusual is kind of my brand," Amara replied, forcing a smile. "I don't exactly come with yacht club credentials." Before Daniel could respond, Malik leaned forward, elbows on the pristine tablecloth. "Are you rich?" he asked bluntly. Amara nearly choked on her water. Malik Daniel looked at the boy unbothered. "Yes, super rich." Malik pressed eyes wide. Daniel hesitated, then gave a single nod. "Then why do you look so sad?" The question sliced through the air like broken glass. Several nearby diners glanced over, curious. Amara wanted to melt into the chair, but Daniel's face shifted. Something flickered, then steadied. "I'm not sad," he said softly. "Yes, you are," Malik insisted. "You look like those men in movies who forget how to play." Amara groaned. "Sweetheart, let's not." But Daniel surprised her again. He leaned back, folded his hands, and studied the boy. "Maybe I did forget." Malik grinned triumphant. "You can practice with us. We're good at playing." Daniel almost smiled. Almost. Amara caught it, and against her better judgment felt a flutter deep in her chest. A waiter returned stiff as before, reciting the specials with the enthusiasm of a funeral director. When Amara asked a question about the menu, his tone sharpened, clipped, as if every second spent on her was a waste. He didn't make eye contact. He didn't write her order down. He simply turned to Daniel for confirmation, as though Amara's words required validation from someone with the right skin color, the right income, the right place in the world. It wasn't the first time Amara had felt it. The dismissive tone, the invisible wall that said you don't belong here. She had swallowed this treatment in grocery stores and office lobbies, even in PTA meetings at Malik's school. But here in front of her son and this stranger who seemed carved out of polished stone, she felt the weight of it harder than usual. "Excuse me," she said sharply to the waiter. "Did you hear my order?" The man blinked, startled. "Of course. Then you can answer me, not him." The waiter's jaw tightened. He scribbled something down and walked away without another word. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That was direct." "That was necessary," Amara replied. Her voice trembled, but she held his gaze. "I'm used to people pretending I don't count. I won't let Malik think that's normal." Silence settled again, but this time it felt different. Daniel didn't look offended. He looked thoughtful. "You think I don't notice things like that," he said at last. "But maybe I don't." "You don't," Amara said simply. And that's the point. For a man accustomed to boardrooms and balance sheets, Daniel seemed oddly unsteady now, as though the ground beneath him had shifted. He glanced at Malik, who was busy making his astronaut toy fly across the table, and then back at her. "You walk into a place like this," Amara continued, lowering her voice, "and it's 100 tiny reminders you're an outsider. The glances, the whispers, the way your food takes longer. You start wondering if you're paranoid until it happens again." Daniel's expression softened, though his posture remained rigid. "That sounds exhausting." "It is," Amara said with a small, humorless laugh. "But you learn to live with it, and sometimes you teach your kid to laugh at it before it swallows him whole." Malik looked up suddenly. Mom makes pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse. That's better than fancy forks, right? Daniel let out a low laugh. It startled even him, as if the sound had been locked away for too long. Better than any fancy fork I've ever seen. For the rest of dinner, conversation flowed in uneven currents. Amara teased him about spreadsheets and millionaire mating rituals. Daniel countered with dry observations that revealed more wit than she expected. Malik chimed in freely, asking questions that sliced through pretense questions about superheroes, favorite ice cream flavors, and why adults were always so serious. Each time Daniel laughed, the tension in the room cracked just slightly. And each time Amara felt the same chill run through her. This man wrapped in wealth and walls was not as untouchable as he appeared. By dessert, Malik had convinced Daniel to order a sundae with 3 scoops. Daniel accepted Salim as a contract, and when the sundae arrived, Malik leaned over the table with chocolate on his lips and whispered, "You can be our new dad if you want." The words dropped like stones into water. Amara froze. Heat rushed to her face. "Malik," she hissed. Daniel looked at the boy, stunned. For a moment, the weight of the restaurant, the stares, the history pressing down on Amara, all of it disappeared. What remained was a man and a child staring at each other across melting scoops of ice cream. Then Daniel laughed again. Deep, genuine. A sound that startled the waitstaff and turned heads at nearby tables. "Well," he said, still smiling, "that's a first." Amara pressed her palm to her forehead. She had come tonight to scare him off. Instead, her son had invited him in, and from the look in Daniel's eyes, she realized with dawning unease he just might accept. The restaurant's candlelight softened the edges of crystal glasses and polished silverware, but it could not soften the tension threading between Amara and Daniel. The sundae bowl sat empty now, Malik proudly scraping the last streak of chocolate, as if victory could be measured in sugar. Amara shifted in her chair, her shoulders tight. Every few minutes she caught another glance, a woman in pearls whispering behind her hand, a man in a navy blazer lifting his brows as though watching a social experiment unfold. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Daniel seemed immune. He poured himself a glass of sparkling water and leaned back with practiced ease, the kind of posture that announced comfort in any room. Amara studied him for a moment, then shook her head. "You don't see it, do you?" she asked. "See what?" His tone was calm, but curiosity flickered in his eyes. She gestured with a sweep of her hand toward the other tables. "The way people look at us. The way the waiter takes longer to refill our glasses. The little things." Daniel followed her gaze. At first his expression didn't change, then he frowned slightly. "They're just curious," he said, though it sounded more like a question. "Curious?" Amara repeated, biting back a laugh. "That's the polite word. I call it being measured, weighing me, asking without words if I belong here." Daniel's jaw tightened, but not at her, at himself. He realized he hadn't noticed, and that troubled him more than he cared to admit. "I'm used to attention," he said quietly. "People always stare." "They stare at you because of who you are," Amara countered. "They stare at me because of what they think I'm not." Malik looked up from his toy, his little brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" Amara smoothed his hair gently. "It means sometimes people decide things about us before they even know us. Like when the kids at school said my skin looked like dirt," Malik asked matter of fact. The words hit Daniel like a blow. He turned sharply toward the boy. "Someone said that to you?" "Yeah?" Malik shrugged, returning to his toy. "But Mom told me dirt makes flowers grow, so I told them I was better than a flower." He grinned, proud of his comeback. Amara smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. He knows how to fight back with words. Daniel stared at them both, unsettled. He had spent years negotiating contracts, breaking rivals with logic and numbers. But this battlefield of everyday insults and invisible walls was something he had never been trained to see, let alone fight. "Does it happen often?" he asked. Amara hesitated. "Often enough that Malik has a whole list of comebacks." Malik chimed in cheerfully. "Like when someone called me a chocolate chip. I said, 'Yeah, I'm the best part of the cookie.'" Daniel's chest tightened. The boy's innocence, his resilience both impressed and broke him. He had lived in a world where problems could be solved with money or influence. This was different. This was survival dressed as humor. The waiter returned, dropping the check with mechanical precision. His eyes slid over Amara without stopping, landing squarely on Daniel. "Whenever you're ready, sir." Amara's jaw clenched. She reached for her purse. "I'll pay my share." Daniel shook his head. "That's not necessary." "Yes, it is." Her voice was firm. "I don't want my son growing up thinking he owes anyone for a seat at the table. Not even you." Daniel froze, then slowly nodded. He hadn't expected that answer. For the first time all evening, silence between them felt less like distance and more like acknowledgement, an uneasy truce across a chasm Daniel had never had to cross. Malik slid his spoon into the empty sundae dish and announced proudly, "Best dinner ever." Amara laughed under her breath. "That's because you got ice cream for dinner." "No," Malik said, grinning at Daniel. "It's because Mr. Sirius laughed. Twice." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "You counted, of course. Mommy says laughter is rare, so you have to keep score." Daniel met Amara's eyes. For once, she didn't look away. And in that quiet, candlelit moment, something unspoken passed between them, something heavier than curiosity, lighter than fate. Daniel had come expecting another night of rehearsed small talk and polished smiles. Instead, he was leaving with a truth lodged in his chest. This woman and her son had cracked open a door he hadn't realized was locked. And Amara, though still bristling against every glance and whisper, felt an unfamiliar heat beneath the weight of it all, an ember that might against all odds become a spark. The city looked different in the quiet of night. Daniel's driver pulled the sleek black car through narrow streets lined with brownstones, their windows glowing faintly against the chill. Amara sat in the back seat beside Malik, who had fallen asleep with his astronaut clutched in one small fist. Daniel sat across from them, his posture as straight as always, but his eyes, those dark, disciplined eyes, kept straying to the boy's face. "You don't have to drive us home," Amara said softly. "We could have taken the bus." Daniel glanced at her, his voice even. "It's late. The bus isn't safe." "Safe," she repeated with a wry smile. "You say it like safety is something you can buy. In my neighborhood, safe is just a day when nobody yells slurs from a passing car." Her words lingered in the air, sharp but unembellished. Daniel didn't argue. He wasn't used to silence meaning agreement, but in that moment, it did. When they reached her apartment building, a squat, aging structure with flaking paint and a broken streetlight overhead, Amara carefully lifted Malik into her arms. The stairwell smelled faintly of damp concrete and old radiator heat. Daniel followed her up the narrow steps, ignoring the way his shoes stuck slightly against the worn linoleum. She unlocked the door to a small unit, one couch, a second-hand table, walls, decorated with Malik's drawings taped in uneven rows. "Home sweet basement," Amara said lightly, laying Malik on the pull-out couch. She covered him with a blanket, brushing curls from his forehead before turning to face Daniel. "You want the tour?" "Won't take long. Kitchen's the size of a closet, bathroom leaks when it rains, and the neighbors play gospel music loud enough to shake the pipes. But rent's cheap, and it's ours." Daniel stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. He had spent his life in sprawling spaces, penthouse lofts, glass boardrooms, family mansions where silence stretched across marble floors. This room, with its mismatched furniture and walls that seemed too close together, felt foreign to him. Yet it pulsed with something he hadn't felt in years' life. "How long have you lived here?" he asked. 3 years, Amara replied, "after I got fired from my last office job." Daniel frowned. "Why fired?" She let out a breath, her smile bitter. "Because I refused to let a supervisor call me token. He said it was a joke. I said it wasn't. HR decided I was the problem." Daniel's chest tightened. He had heard stories like this, but hearing it in her voice, steady-edged with fatigue, was different. "I tried everything after that," she went on. "Retail, babysitting, catering, temp work. Whatever kept Malik fed and in school. Every paycheck felt like drawing lines on a map, how far we could stretch groceries, which bills we could pay late without the lights going out." She laughed softly, but it was humor worn thin by years. "You learn to live small. to make forts out of couch cushions instead of booking vacations. To tell your kid popcorn for dinner is an adventure, not a budget. Daniel looked at her words caught in his throat. For once, the man who always had answers had none. My father used to say, Amara continued quietly, we can't choose the world we're born into, but we can choose how we fight back. He marched for civil rights in the 70s. Never made much money, but he made sure I knew where I came from. Then he passed when I was 19, and I realized the world doesn't hand out mercy. Her voice faltered. She turned toward Malik, who stirred in his sleep, but didn't wake. Sometimes I wonder if I'm enough for him, if love is enough against everything out there waiting to tell him he's less. Daniel stepped closer, his polished shoes creaking against the uneven floor. You are more than enough. Amara met his gaze, her eyes shining but steady. You say that like it's simple. For me, every day is proving it. For you, it's just words. He wanted to argue to insist he understood, but he didn't. He had grown up with private tutors and legacy clubs, with his last name opening doors before he even knew what those doors were. The distance between them stretched wider than the square footage of the apartment. I lost my father when I was 7, Daniel said, finally, his voice lower than she had ever heard it. Car accident, rainy night, a drunk driver. My mother never remarried. She buried herself in the family business, and I buried myself in work. I thought if I made enough money, I wouldn't feel the emptiness. Amara studied him in silence. For a moment, the sharp lines of wealth and race and class blurred, leaving only 2 people bound by loss, sitting in a dim apartment that smelled faintly of laundry detergent and hope. You know what the real line on the map is? Amara said softly. It's not the one between rich and poor. It's the one between people who see the fight and people who pretend it's not there. Daniel nodded slowly. Then maybe it's time I stop pretending. For the first time, she smiled at him without irony. And though the room was small, it felt just for that night like it could hold a world big enough for both of them. Sunday afternoons at the Monroe estate were usually rehearsed to perfection. The red brick mansion loomed on its hilltop like a museum, every hedge trimmed, every window polished until it glowed. Inside, chandeliers glittered, and the scent of fresh lilies filled the hall. It was a world built on control of image, of silence, of legacy. Amara felt that control pressing down on her as she stepped inside. Malik's small hand gripped tightly in hers. She had dressed in her best, a navy dress she'd bought at a thrift shop, and altered herself. Malik wore the same little suit from the restaurant, his sneakers scrubbed clean. Still, the moment her heels clicked against marble, she felt exposed, as though every imperfection in her life were being projected onto these immaculate walls. Daniel walked beside her, calm as ever, though his hand flexed nervously against his side. My mother can be direct, he warned under his breath. Amara raised a brow. Direct? How sharp-tongued, or rich people polite? He almost smiled. Both. The dining room doors opened, revealing Eleanor Monroe at the head of a long mahogany table. She was tall, silver-haired, dressed in a tailored suit that whispered authority. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, landed first on Daniel, then shifted to Amara and Malik. Daniel, she said warmly, kissing her son's cheek. Then to Amara. So you're the woman who made my son laugh. Her voice was even, but the words carried weight. Amara felt heat rise to her cheeks. I suppose that's me. Eleanor's gaze swept over her, measuring, assessing. Not cruel, not kind, curious. Please sit, both of you. As they settled at the table, Malik leaned close to Amara and whispered much too loudly, This place looks like a castle. Eleanor's lips twitched. A castle needs life, young man. I'm glad you brought some. Amara blinked. Not the icy reception she'd expected. Still, tension lingered in every polished corner. The first courses arrived, delicate plates of food Amara couldn't pronounce. She tried to hold her fork properly, conscious of Eleanor's watchful eyes. Malik, oblivious, swung his legs and asked questions about everything: the chandeliers, the paintings, the silverware. He's curious, Amara said apologetically. As he should be, Eleanor replied, surprising her. Curiosity is a sign of intelligence. For a moment, Amara relaxed. Maybe this wouldn't be a battlefield after all. But then came the turn. Eleanor set down her glass and regarded Amara directly. "You must know she began that life in this family is visible, scrutinized. People will talk." Amara straightened. "They already do." Eleanor tilted her head. "Because of who you are. Because of what I look like." Amara corrected her tone steady. "And because I don't come from money." A flicker crossed Eleanor's face, acknowledgement but also unease. "Daniel has obligations. The Monroe name carries expectations. Expectations like marrying someone with the right pedigree." Amara asked, her voice sharper now. Silence stretched. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them. Eleanor finally said, "I only want my son to be happy. But happiness can be fragile when the world insists on drawing lines." Amara met her gaze. "Those lines have been drawn my whole life. I don't need to be warned about them. I just need to know if you expect me to pretend they don't exist." The air seemed to crystallize. Malik, sensing the tension, looked between the women wide-eyed. To Amara's surprise, Eleanor didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned back and folded her hands. "No, I don't expect you to pretend. I expect you to be strong enough to stand beside him when those lines cut deep." It wasn't approval. It wasn't rejection. It was a challenge. And in that moment, Amara realized the glass walls of this house weren't built just to shine. They were built to watch who dared to walk inside and who had the courage not to break under the weight of being seen. As dessert arrived, Malik asked for extra whipped cream, and Eleanor herself spooned it onto his plate. For the first time, Amara caught the faintest smile on the older woman's face. The battle wasn't won, but neither was it lost. The dining room had finally begun to settle into a rhythm. Malik was happily describing his favorite cartoons to Eleanor, who listened with surprising patience. Daniel looked almost relaxed, as if the weight on his shoulders had eased for just a moment. Amara allowed herself to breathe. Then the doors opened. A woman swept in unannounced, her heels clicking against the marble like gunshots. Blonde hair, perfectly styled dress, sculpted to perfection, every movement radiating entitlement. Her eyes found Daniel first, then slid to Amara with a smirk sharpened by years of practice. "Daniel, darling," she purred, ignoring the startled look on Eleanor's face. "What a surprise to find you entertaining tonight." Daniel stiffened. "Vivian." Amara didn't need an introduction. She knew the type, polished, privileged, confident, that the world owed her its finest seat. Vivian's gaze drifted over Amara like she was a stain on the tablecloth. "And this must be—" Vivian let the words dangle her smile poisonous. "This is Amara," Daniel said firmly. "And her son Malik." "Charmed," Vivian replied, extending a manicured hand. The gesture was civil, but her eyes betrayed contempt. Amara shook it anyway, gripping harder than expected. "Likewise." They sat again, though the atmosphere had shifted. Eleanor's polite composure remained, but her eyes narrowed slightly, a warning glint directed at Vivian. Vivian leaned back in her chair, speaking loudly enough to carry. "You know, Daniel, it's refreshing to see you. Expand your horizons." Amara's stomach tightened. The words were wrapped in silk but carried the sting of steel. "Expand your horizons," as if she were some experiment. Daniel's voice hardened. "Vivian, this isn't your concern." "Oh, but it is," she said sweetly. "Society cares deeply about who the Monroes welcome to their table. Don't you agree?" Mrs. Monroe Eleanor's fork paused against her plate. "I don't recall inviting you tonight, Vivian." Vivian's smile didn't falter. "I was nearby. I thought I'd drop in. And I must say, it's fascinating." Her eyes cut to Amara again, assessing her dress, her posture, her very presence. "Tell me, Amara, what do you do?" Amara felt the trap closing. She could lie, she could deflect, but that wasn't her way. "I work wherever I can," she said evenly. "Retail, catering, temporary offices. I do what I need to keep my son safe and cared for." Vivian's brows arched. "How industrious." "I think I remember you, actually. Bella Vista, downtown. You spilled sauce on my Hermes bag, didn't you?" The air thickened. Amara remembered that night. Vivian had humiliated half the staff with complaints and demands. Amara had apologized until her throat burned. "Yes," Amara said now, her voice cool. "I remember. You were the customer who made 3 waitresses cry in one evening." A beat of silence. Then Eleanor laughed, quiet, deliberate but unmistakable. Daniel's lips twitched despite himself. Vivian's smile cracked. "Well, I just have high standards." Amara leaned forward. "So do I. Mine just happen to involve treating people like human beings." Vivian's eyes narrowed to slits. "Interesting. A single mother from a basement apartment sitting in the Monroe mansion. Quite the leap. Almost strategic, wouldn't you say?" Amara felt Malik stiffen beside her. She placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "Strategic, no. Honest? Yes. I didn't come here with a plan. I came because my sister tricked me into a blind date." Vivian's laugh was sharp and hollow. "And already your son is calling Daniel his new father. Very efficient." That was too far. Malik's face felt confusion clouding his bright eyes. "Enough?" Eleanor snapped her voice, slicing through the room. "Vivian, you will not speak to a child that way in my home." But Vivian pressed on voice syrupy with false concern. "I only want you to see clearly, Mrs. Monroe. Some people don't belong in our world. Better to know now than later." Amara rose from her chair slowly, her movements measured. Her heart thundered, but her voice was steady. "You're right, Vivian. I don't belong in your world. I belong in mine, a world where I work for what I have, where I raise my son with dignity, and where I can sleep at night knowing I didn't climb by stepping on others." Her words landed heavy in the room. Vivian's mask faltered, her cheeks flushed. Malik tugged Amara's hand. "Mom, can we go? I don't like this lady." Amara looked at Daniel. His jaw was clenched, eyes burning with anger, not at her but at the cruelty laid bare at his table. Vivian stood abruptly, her chair scraping across the marble. "If this is the company you keep now, Daniel, then good luck. You'll need it." She swept out of the room, her perfume lingering like smoke. Silence followed, thick and brittle. Then Eleanor set down her fork with a decisive clink. "Well, that was unpleasant." She turned to Amara and Malik. "Please don't let that viper ruin our evening. She has been asked to leave better homes than this." Amara let out a shaky breath, lowering back into her chair. Malik leaned against her side, comforted by her steady presence. For the first time since stepping into the Monroe mansion, Amara felt she had done more than survive. She had stood her ground and won. The night after Vivian's ambush at the Monroe mansion, Amara sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the peeling paint on her apartment ceiling. Malik was asleep beside her, his small breaths even and steady. The fortress of innocence he carried in his dreams shielded him from the questions still echoing in her mind. "Do I belong anywhere?" She got up quietly, stepping over toy blocks scattered across the floor, and wandered into the kitchen. The sink dripped in irregular beats. The refrigerator hummed loudly, its seal half broken. She leaned her elbows against the counter and exhaled. The knock at the door startled her. For a moment she thought it might be the landlord again demanding rent early. But when she opened it, Daniel stood in the hallway, his expensive coat stark against the cracked linoleum. "You shouldn't be here," Amara whispered. "Maybe not," Daniel admitted. "But I couldn't stop thinking about tonight." She crossed her arms. "You mean Vivian calling me an opportunist, or your mother watching to see if I'd break?" "I mean you," he said simply. Amara shook her head, frustration simmering. "This is my reality, Daniel. I don't get to disappear into mansions and reappear in glossy magazines. I get damp walls and nights praying the pipes don't burst, and that's on a good week." Daniel stepped inside his gaze, roaming over the small apartment. Malik's crayon drawings hung crooked on the wall. A stack of bills sat on the counter marked with red stamps. The ceiling light flickered once before settling. "This isn't enough for you," he said quietly. Her chin lifted. "Don't you dare pity me." "I'm not," he replied. "I'm angry. That you have to fight this hard just to give Malik what should be basic, and that people like Vivian use your struggle as proof you don't belong." She wanted to argue, but his voice held a rawness she hadn't heard before. "Come with me tomorrow," Daniel said. "There's an apartment. Mine from before I moved into the loft. It's furnished safe near good schools. You and Malik could stay there." Amara's eyes narrowed. "That sounds a lot like charity." "It's not charity," Daniel insisted. "It's an exchange. I need help planning a major charity event for the company. You have ideas I don't. You could work with me and live there while you do." Her laugh was sharp. "So I trade one kind of dependence for another. No thank you." "Amara," he said, stepping closer, his voice low, "you'd be running the project. Paid. Independent. I don't want to rescue you. I want to work with you." For a long moment, the only sound was the dripping sink. Amara studied him, trying to decide if she saw sincerity or just another version of control. Finally, she asked, "And if I say yes, what's the catch?" "You pay the bills," Daniel said without hesitation. "Water, electricity, internet. You clean, you keep your independence, and if you ever feel uncomfortable, you walk away. No drama, no questions." The firmness in his tone surprised her. He wasn't offering charity. He was setting terms like he would in any business deal. But this time, the contract was written with respect. Amara crossed her arms tighter, though her resolve began to soften. "And Malik. He gets his own room," Daniel said, "with a bed that doesn't fold up into a couch, with a light that doesn't flicker, with space to play." Her throat tightened. She imagined Malik's face waking up in a real room, a window letting in morning sun instead of a sliver of sidewalk shadows. "You really think this will work?" she asked. "I think," Daniel said carefully, "that for the first time in years, I want something to work. Not because it looks good on paper, because it feels right." The sincerity in his eyes caught her off guard. This wasn't the polished CEO from glossy magazines. This was a man fumbling towards something unfamiliar: partnership. Amara sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Fine, but with conditions. Name them. First, I pay every bill myself. Second, I keep my job title, not just assistant or +1. Third, if another Vivian tries to humiliate me, you don't stand back. And fourth," she paused, her lips curving slightly, "no makeover montages. I'm not turning into some society princess." Daniel smiled faintly. "Agreed. Every point." She studied him for another moment, then extended her hand. He took it firm and steady, like a man signing the most important contract of his life. When he left that night, Amara stood in the doorway, long after his footsteps faded down the hall. She glanced back at Malik, curled beneath his blanket, then at the stack of bills still waiting on the counter. For the first time in years, the weight on her chest shifted, not gone but lighter. Maybe, just maybe, this blueprint he'd drawn could hold. 3 days later, Amara found herself standing in a conference room that felt larger than her entire apartment. Glass walls reflected the city skyline, and a long oak table stretched toward windows that looked out over Boston Harbor. She smoothed her skirt and reminded herself she wasn't here as someone's guest, she was here to work. Daniel entered with his usual calm precision, a tablet in hand. "This is where we'll plan the Monroe Foundation's annual charity event," he said. "Traditionally, it's a gala dinner with speeches and an auction." Amara tilted her head, unimpressed. "So a room full of rich people congratulating themselves?" His brow furrowed. "That's one way to describe it." "It's the wrong way," she countered. "Numbers on a screen and polite clapping don't change anything. If you want people to care, they need to feel." Daniel set the tablet down slowly. "And what do you suggest?" Amara stepped to the whiteboard at the far end of the room, uncapping a marker with a snap. "Stop thinking gala. Think fair." She sketched rough circles and arrows, her handwriting slanting across the glossy surface. "Food stalls, music games for kids. But here's the key. You invite the very children you're trying to help. Let donors meet them. Let them see talent and joy, not just statistics." Daniel leaned against the table, watching her with growing interest. "You'd put the kids at the center." "Yes," Amara said firmly. "Showcase their art, their science projects, their music. Let them perform, demonstrate, teach. Make the donors participants, not spectators. No endless speeches. People stop listening after 10 minutes anyway." He studied her notes, then looked back at her. "That's brilliant." "It's obvious," she replied, capping the marker. "You just never asked someone who's been on the other side of those numbers." For the first time in his career, Daniel felt the sting of humility not as an insult, but as an awakening. He had built empires out of logic, but here was a woman building a vision out of lived truth. The rest of the afternoon unfolded in unexpected rhythm. Amara suggested themes and activities. Daniel adjusted budgets and logistics. Malik, perched on a chair with a box of crayons, interrupted occasionally with ideas of his own. Face painting station obstacle course, a giant fort. Each time Daniel dutifully wrote it down as though Malik were another board member. By evening, the whiteboard was a riot of colors, circles, and notes. Amara stepped back, laughing at the chaos. "It looks like Malik's coloring wall." "Then maybe he's our chief creative officer," Daniel said, glancing at the boy with a rare softness. Malik grinned. "Does that mean I get paid?" Daniel pretended to think. "Ice cream salary." "Deal," Malik declared. Amara rolled her eyes but couldn't stop her smile. For the first time, she saw Daniel not as the impenetrable CEO, but as a man who listened, who bent when someone pushed, who could even joke. Later, while Malik napped on a couch in the corner, Amara and Daniel reviewed the final draft. Their shoulders brushed once, twice. The air shifted, charged with something neither spoke aloud. "You're good at this," Daniel said finally. "Better than most professionals I've hired." She looked at him surprised. "Planning a fair isn't exactly Wall Street strategy. It's people strategy," he countered. "And that's harder." She felt her cheeks warm but looked away. Compliments from him unsettled her more than criticism ever could. As the evening darkened outside the glass walls, Daniel gathered his papers. "I'll have the team draft proposals based on your plan." Amara shook her head. "No, I'll draft them. You said this was a job, remember? Let me prove it." He paused, studying her face. Determined, fierce, tired, but unbroken. Finally, he nodded. "All right, you're in charge." Her chest tightened. In charge. Words she hadn't heard in years, words denied to her too many times for reasons never spoken, but always known. She turned back to the whiteboard, tracing over Malik's doodle of a rocket ship. "Then let's build something worth remembering." Daniel watched her in silence, realizing that this was no longer about a charity event. It was about learning to see through her eyes, and once seen, he could never unsee again. The week before the charity fair, Amara insisted on taking Daniel and his team to the community center in Roxbury, the place where many of the children who would attend spent their afternoons. Numbers look neat in a report, she told him, as they rode together in his town car. But reality doesn't fit into neat columns. Daniel adjusted his tie, his discomfort obvious. He was used to skyscrapers and glass-walled boardrooms, not graffiti-scarred brick buildings with basketball hoops chained to rusted poles. The center director, Ms. Carter, greeted them warmly, her voice strong from years of commanding noisy classrooms. Children's artwork covered the walls. Bright suns, jagged rainbows, bold statements scrawled in crayon. "We matter. We belong." Amara's face softened. "This is what I wanted you to see." Daniel followed her through the noisy hallways. Kids darted around chasing basketballs, carrying books too big for their backpacks. They looked up at Daniel curiously, some whispering, others bold enough to ask if he was famous. One boy tugged Amara's sleeve. "Miss Johnson, you brought a prince?" She laughed. "Not a prince, just a man who needs to learn how to play." Daniel almost smiled. Almost. During the tour, Malik joined a group at the art table, proudly showing Daniel his messy painting of a rocket blasting through clouds. "It's us," he explained. "Me mommy and Mr. Ice Cream flying to space." Daniel studied the paint strokes, the crooked letters spelling family. Something tightened in his chest. On their way back to the car, Amara stopped at a corner store to buy Malik a juice box. Daniel followed, unfamiliar with the narrow aisles and buzzing fluorescent lights. The cashier, a middle-aged white man, barely looked at Amara as she set the juice on the counter. His eyes flicked to Daniel instead. $1.75, he said curtly, ignoring Amara's outstretched bill. Daniel frowned. "She's paying." The cashier hesitated, then took Amara's money with obvious reluctance. Back outside, Amara's jaw was tight. "That right there? That's the 1,000 little cuts. The look that says, your money doesn't count unless someone like him validates it." Daniel glanced back at the store, anger flashing in his eyes. He had crushed hostile board members, outmaneuvered rivals in billion-dollar deals. But this casual dismissal of a woman who had fought for every dollar, felt more brutal than any corporate battle. "Why didn't you say something?" he asked. "Because if I snapped every time it happened, I'd spend my life fighting shadows," Amara said. "Sometimes silence is survival." But Malik saw it. "That's what I can't stand." Her voice cracked. "He's already learning the world measures him before he speaks." Daniel walked beside her in silence, the weight of her words pressing down. For the first time, he understood that his wealth had insulated him from storms others faced daily. Money couldn't buy the feeling of walking into a room and being doubted before you spoke. When they reached the car, Malik looked up at Daniel, his juice box in hand. "Why was that man mean to Mommy?" Daniel crouched to meet his eyes. "Because some people forget how to see what's real. They only see what they expect." Malik frowned. "That's dumb." "Yes," Daniel agreed. "It is." Amara watched them, her chest tightening again, but differently this time. For years she had carried these battles alone. Seeing Daniel not only notice but name them gave her a flicker of something she didn't dare call hope. Back at his office, Daniel gathered his team. "The fair is no longer a photo op," he said, his voice sharp with conviction. "It's a bridge. We're not just raising money, we're raising awareness. If anyone disagrees, there's the door." His executives exchanged uneasy glances, but none spoke. Daniel Monroe had never sounded more certain. That night, Amara tucked Malik into his new room at Daniel's spare apartment. The boy's rocket painting was taped proudly above the bed. As she turned off the lamp, Malik whispered, "Mommy, Mr. Ice Cream stood up for you today." Amara smiled in the dark. Yes, he did. And for the first time, she wondered if this unlikely partnership could survive not just the stares of strangers, but the storms yet to come. The first whispers reached Amara a week before the charity fair. She overheard them in the Monroe office hallway, two assistants murmuring while pretending to photocopy. "Look her up online. Says she's dated older men before. Single mom with a plan, if you ask me." The words trailed off as Amara entered, but their glances lingered. She pretended not to notice, but a cold knot formed in her stomach. That evening, Daniel arrived at the apartment carrying takeout boxes. Malik ran to him shouting Mr. Ice Cream, as though nothing in the world could go wrong. Amara forced a smile while unpacking dinner, but she couldn't shake the unease. The storm broke 2 days later. Vivian Sterling appeared again, this time in Daniel's office, perfectly dressed, her smile sharpened to a blade. She set a folder on his desk and slid it toward him. "You deserve to know the truth about your new companion." Daniel frowned but opened it. Inside were printouts of Amara's old social media posts, grainy photos from jobs long past, and a report from a private investigator. The narrative was clear. Amara was painted as a woman who targeted financially stable men, using Malik as a way to gain sympathy. "She looked you up online before the date," Vivian said smoothly. "She knew exactly who you were. Does that sound like coincidence?" Daniel's throat tightened. Anyone might research a stranger before meeting them. Vivian leaned closer. "And what about Michael Patterson? Divorced, owns an accounting firm. She dated him for 6 months. Convenient, don't you think?" Daniel's mind swirled. He remembered Amara's laughter, her fire, the way she stood up in the mansion dining room. But now doubts clawed at him. Had it all been calculated? That night when Amara arrived at the office to finalize plans for the fair, she found Daniel cold, distant. The warmth that had begun to grow between them was gone, replaced by a CEO's mask. "Is it true?" he asked without preamble. Her heart lurched. "Is what true? That you knew who I was before the blind date? That you researched me?" Amara blinked. "Of course I did. I'm a single mother. I don't meet strangers without knowing who they are. That's called protecting my child." His jaw tightened. "And Michael Patterson?" Amara's voice faltered. "Yes, I dated him. He was kind to Malik, but when he wanted me to quit working and depend on him, I ended it. That's the truth." Daniel's eyes searched hers, but doubt remained. "Then why does it feel like I don't know who you are?" Her chest constricted, fury and hurt tangling in her throat. "Because you'd rather believe Vivian's lies than trust what you've seen with your own eyes." The office fell silent, the city skyline glowing cold beyond the windows. "I can't do this," Amara whispered at last. I won't stay where I'm treated like a suspect for daring to survive." She gathered her bag and walked out before he could reply. When she reached the apartment, Malik was building a pillow fort in the living room. "Is Mr. Ice Cream coming tonight?" he asked hopefully. Amara's throat closed. She knelt beside him, pulling him into her arms. "Not tonight, sweetheart." As Malik drifted to sleep clutching his astronaut toy, Amara sat in the dark. The walls of the apartment, once a promise of possibility, now felt like a cage built on doubt. By morning, she had packed their bags. If Daniel Monroe saw her as a scheme, then she would not give him the satisfaction of proving Vivian right. But as she closed the door behind her, her heart ached with the truth she could not deny she had let him in. And losing him felt like losing more than safety, more than stability. It felt like losing the fragile spark of belonging she had barely dared to hope for. Rain hammered the streets of Boston the night Amara left Daniel's apartment. She dragged 2 suitcases down the narrow steps, Malik clutching his astronaut toy, as if it could hold his world together. "Mom," he whispered, his voice small against the storm. "Did we do something wrong? Is that why Mr. Ice Cream is mad?" Amara's chest ached. She crouched, brushing the wet curls from his forehead. "No, baby. We didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes adults forget how to trust." Malik frowned. "But I trust him." Her throat tightened. "I know." She kissed his cheek. "And maybe one day he'll remember how to trust us back." They rode the bus across town, the windows streaked with rain. Amara watched the city blur into light and shadow, her reflection staring back at her like a stranger. She thought of the mansion, the laughter at the dinner table, the plans drawn across the whiteboard. All of it felt fragile now, like glass shattered under pressure. At her grandmother's house in Springfield, Amara unpacked slowly. Grandma Helen fussed over them, making tea and scolding the weather, but her sharp eyes saw deeper. "What happened, child?" Amara shook her head. "He believed the wrong person." Helen's mouth tightened. Rich men have a way of thinking money buys them the truth. But truth doesn't wear a price tag. For the next week, Amara tried to settle into old routines, job applications, babysitting gigs, Malik's school forms, but nothing fit. Malik asked daily if Daniel would visit. Each time Amara told him gently, "Not today." Each time his little shoulders slumped. Meanwhile, across the city, Daniel buried himself in work. His penthouse was immaculate, his schedule full, but silence pressed in heavier than ever. At night he lay awake, hearing Malik's small voice. "Why do you look sad?" He told himself he'd made the rational choice. He'd avoided being used. So why did it feel like he'd cut out a piece of his own heart? One evening, Eleanor found him in his office papers, scattered across the desk. "You look like a ghost," she said. Daniel didn't look up. "I made a mistake." She folded her arms. "The mistake isn't that you loved her. The mistake is that you let fear speak louder than love." His hands tightened around his pen. "She could have lied." "She told you the truth," Eleanor interrupted sharply. "You just didn't want to believe her because believing meant letting go of the walls you've built." Daniel finally looked up, anguish flickering across his face. "And now it's too late." Back in Springfield, Amara took Malik to the park. Children chased each other across wet grass, but Malik sat quietly on the swings, dragging his sneakers against the dirt. "Don't you want to play?" Amara asked softly. He shook his head. "It's not fun without him." Her heart cracked. She pushed the swing, gently forcing brightness into her voice. "Then we'll find new games. Just us." Malik glanced up at her, eyes wide and solemn. "Mommy, you're enough, but I still miss him." Tears stung her eyes, but she nodded. "I miss him too." That night after Malik was asleep, Amara opened her laptop to apply for a job at a catering company, but her hands hovered over the keys, unable to move. She thought of Daniel kneeling beside Malik, teaching him how to build a pillow fort, laughing at ice cream jokes. She thought of the way his eyes softened when he looked at her like she was the only one in the room, and she thought of the doubt, the cold mask in his office when he asked, "How do I know you're not using me?" The break wasn't just in their relationship, it was inside her, a fracture between hope and reality. She had dared to believe love could rise above the lines drawn by money, by race, by history, but maybe those lines were too strong. In his penthouse, Daniel sat alone at the edge of his bedphone in hand. He had called her number 5 times already, each time voicemail. He wanted to hear her voice to tell her he was wrong, but pride chained him silent. When dawn came, both lay awake in different cities, staring at ceilings that offered no answers. For Amara, the question was survival. For Daniel, the question was redemption. And for Malik, asleep with his astronaut clutched to his chest, the question was simpler, heavier. When will my family be whole again? The following Monday, Eleanor Monroe received an unexpected visitor at the mansion. A thin man with tired eyes stood nervously at the door, clutching a worn leather briefcase. "Mrs. Monroe," he asked, his voice trembling. "My name is Robert Chen. I need to speak with you. It's about Miss Sterling." Eleanor studied him sharply, then ushered him inside. Minutes later, they sat in the sunroom, surrounded by glass walls and quiet. Robert opened his briefcase, his hands shaking as he spread documents across the table. "Vivian Sterling hired me," he confessed, "to investigate Amara Johnson. I did find some truths, her past jobs, her relationship with Michael Patterson, but she pressured me to exaggerate, to twist the facts into a pattern of manipulation." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Exaggerate how she told me to frame Amara as a gold digger, to make it look as though she targets wealthy men using her son as bait." His voice broke. "I falsified parts of the report. She threatened to ruin me if I refused. But I can't keep silent. It isn't right." Eleanor's pulse quickened, anger burning hot beneath her composed exterior. "So my son ended things with Amara because of lies?" Robert nodded miserably. "Yes, lies." Without hesitation, Eleanor stood. "You're coming with me." Daniel was in his office downtown, staring at spreadsheets he couldn't process, when his assistant buzzed in. "Your mother is here, and she isn't alone." Eleanor swept into the room, Robert trailing behind her. Daniel looked up, startled. "Mother, what? Sit down." Eleanor ordered, her tone sharp enough to cut steel. Robert cleared his throat and repeated everything he'd told Eleanor. The room grew colder with each word. Daniel listened, his face pale, his fingers gripping the edge of his desk. When Robert finished, silence thickened. Daniel finally whispered, "So it was all fabricated." "Partially true, mostly fabricated," Robert admitted. "Yes, she researched you before the date, but any responsible mother would. Yes, she dated Michael Patterson, but ended it when he tried to control her. Everything else was twisted." Eleanor's eyes blazed. "Daniel, do you understand what you've done? You let a viper like Vivian decide who Amara was. You doubted the woman who made you laugh for the first time in years. And worse, you broke a little boy's heart." Daniel pressed his palms against his face. The weight of realization crashed over him like a tidal wave. He remembered Malik's small voice. Why was that man mean to Mommy? He remembered Amara's fury. "You'd rather believe lies than your own eyes." "I destroyed it," he whispered hoarsely. "Yes," Eleanor said bluntly. "You destroyed it. But it isn't too late unless you stay here wallowing instead of fighting for her." Daniel lifted his head, anguish carved into his features. "And if she won't forgive me," Eleanor's expression softened slightly, "then at least she'll know the truth. And you'll know you tried." That evening, Daniel drove to Amara's old apartment. Mrs. Betty, the landlord, answered, with her apron dusted in flour. "Mr. Ice Cream," she said, surprised. "You've got nerve showing up here." "Is she here?" Daniel asked desperately. Betty's smile faded. "No, honey." She left, went back to Springfield, said Boston was too heavy with bad memories. Daniel's chest tightened. "Do you know where in Springfield she's with her grandmother?" "Yellow house, white picket fence, Maple Street." "But listen." Betty's eyes sharpened. "That girl loves you. And that little boy. He talks about you like you hung the moon. Don't mess this up again." Daniel swallowed hard. "I won't." 2 hours later, he stood at the Parker family's doorstep in Springfield. The yellow house glowed warmly under the porch light. When the door opened, Grandma Helen Parker peered out, her sharp gaze instantly sizing him up. "You're the CEO who broke my granddaughter's heart," she said flatly. "Yes, ma'am," Daniel admitted. His voice trembled with honesty. "And I came to make it right." Helen studied him in silence. Then slowly she stepped aside. "Come in. We'll see if you mean that." Inside, family photos covered the walls, Amara as a teenager in graduation robes, Malik as a baby, with frosting on his cheeks. Daniel's throat tightened at the sight. Helen poured coffee and sat opposite him. Amara cried 3 nights straight after you let that Sterling woman poison your mind. Malik asked for you every morning. Tell me, Mr. Monroe, why should I let you anywhere near them again? Daniel clasped his hands. Because I was wrong. Because I believed a lie when I should have trusted what I saw. Because I love them, both of them. And if Amara gives me another chance, I'll spend the rest of my life proving it. Helen's sharp eyes softened just slightly. Good answer. But she isn't here. She took a job in Hartwell, the next town over. Entertaining kids at parties. Said she needed to start fresh. Daniel's heart clenched. Hartwell. How far? 20 minutes, Helen said. Then she leaned forward, her voice low and firm. But hear me well, son. If you go to her and break her again, you'll answer to me. And I'm not nearly as forgiving as my granddaughter. Daniel stood, determination burning in his chest. Understood. Helen allowed herself a small smile. Then go get my girl. The backyard in Hartwell was strung with paper lanterns and balloons, a rainbow explosion of color against the suburban sky. Children shrieked with laughter, chasing bubbles and batting at streamers. At the center of it all stood Amara, dressed in a glittering fairy costume, her wand raised as she directed the chaos of a 6-year-old's birthday party. Now everyone close your eyes and count to 3, she called. The kids obeyed, squeezing their eyes shut. Amara blew a handful of glitter into the air. 1, 2, 3, magic. When the children opened their eyes, bubbles floated above them like tiny orbs of light. Their delighted cheers rang across the yard, and Amara forced a smile. She had learned to disguise her exhaustion with sparkle, but inside her chest still carried the ache of Boston, the betrayal, the look on Daniel's face when doubt had replaced trust. The gate creaked open. Amara turned, expecting another late parent or delivery. Instead, her breath caught. A giant ice cream cone waddled into the yard. The children shrieked in delight. Ice cream. Ice cream. The mascot costume was ridiculous, cone-shaped body, oversized, vanilla head, arms, waving awkwardly. Yet there was something about the stride, the posture, the determination in the way it crossed the yard. Amara froze her wand, slipping in her grip. "Hello, kids," boomed a muffled voice from inside the costume. "Who here likes ice cream?" A chorus of me erupted. The mascot knelt slightly, voice softening. "And who here knows a very special fairy named Amara?" The children pointed eagerly. Her, the fairy lady. Amara's knees felt weak. She knew that voice. The mascot turned toward her. "Fairy Amara, I came to ask something very important. Do you think you can forgive a very sorry ice cream?" The kids gasped as though this were part of the show. Amara pressed a hand to her chest. "Daniel," she whispered. The children chanted, "Take off the head, take off the head." Slowly, the mascot removed the giant vanilla head. Daniel's face appeared flushed, sweaty, but open in a way Amara had never seen. His dark eyes found hers raw with desperation. The yard fell into silence. Even the children sensed the weight of the moment. Daniel dropped to one knee, still in the absurd cone costume. "Amara Johnson," he said, his voice breaking. "I was a coward. I let fear and lies blind me. I hurt you, and I broke Malik's heart. I was so afraid of being used that I didn't see the truth you were giving me, the kind of family I didn't know I needed." Gasps rose from the children, followed by cheers. "Say yes, say yes." Amara's throat tightened. "Daniel, you humiliated me. You let Vivian's poison matter more than my word." "I know," he said quickly, "and I will regret it every day of my life. But if you give me another chance, I'll spend that life proving your trust is safe with me. No doubts, no walls, just us." One little boy tugged Daniel's cone costume. "Mister, are you asking her to marry you?" Laughter rippled through the yard. Daniel reached into the costume pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it, revealing a simple ring that caught the sunlight. "Yes," he said, voice trembling. "Amara Johnson, will you marry me and let me be Malik's real father?" The children squealed, jumping up and down, chanting, "Say yes, say yes." Amara's eyes filled with tears. She looked at the man kneeling before her, ridiculous in foam and fabric, yet more vulnerable than he had ever been. She thought of Malik of the pillow forts and laughter of the 1,000 quiet ways Daniel had begun to change. "Only if you promise never to doubt me again," she said firmly. "I promise," he whispered. "And if you promise Malik comes first, always." Daniel nodded, his voice thick. "Always." Amara held out her hand and the children erupted as Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger. The cheer was deafening. Bubbles floated upward, glitter sparkled in the air, and in the middle of a suburban backyard, fairy wings and an ice cream cone sealed their vow with a kiss. For the first time in weeks, Amara's laughter rang true. She had thought her story with Daniel was broken beyond repair. But sometimes the most powerful magic came not from wands or fairy dust, but from courage, apology, and the stubborn hope of starting again. The news broke the very next morning. Amara woke to her phone buzzing nonstop messages from friends, coworkers, even strangers. Headlines blared across every screen. CEO Daniel Monroe engaged to single mother. From basement apartment to billionaire's bride, coincidence or strategy, fairy tale or gold digging. Her stomach twisted. She hadn't even had time to call her grandmother before the world had decided what her love story meant. By the time Daniel arrived at the apartment, reporters were already camped outside, cameras flashing as soon as he stepped from his car. Malik pressed his face to the window, frightened. "Mommy, why are those people shouting?" Amara pulled him back gently. "They just want a picture, sweetheart. That's all." But inside, her hands trembled. This wasn't curiosity, it was intrusion. That afternoon, Daniel called a press conference at Monroe Associates. The room was packed, reporters, photographers, lenses glinting under harsh lights. Eleanor stood to one side, dignified as ever. Amara clutched Malik's hand so tightly his small fingers squirmed. Daniel stepped up to the podium, his voice steady but fierce. "There's been speculation about my personal life. Let me be clear. Amara Johnson is not a scheme. She is not a headline. She is the woman who made me laugh for the first time in years, who taught me that family isn't about bloodlines or balance sheets. It's about love. And she and her son are my family." The room erupted in questions. One reporter shouted, "Is it true she knew who you were before your first date?" "Yes," Daniel replied. "She looked me up because she's a responsible mother who protects her child. Any parent should do the same." Another voice, "But what about the social class difference? Doesn't that raise concerns?" Daniel's jaw tightened. If loving someone from a different background is controversial, then controversy is exactly what this world needs. Because love that crosses those lines is the only kind that changes anything. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Amara felt her throat close, emotion surging. Malik tugged her hand, then suddenly marched forward. "Can I say something?" he asked, tugging at Daniel's sleeve. Daniel bent down, holding the mic closer. "Go ahead, buddy." Malik's small voice echoed through the room. "My mommy's the best. She makes pancakes like Mickey Mouse. And Miss Taster, ice cream makes her laugh. So stop saying mean things about them." Laughter burst through the tension reporters, lowering their cameras for once. Even Eleanor wiped the corner of her eye. In that moment, the storm outside couldn't touch them. But storms don't vanish overnight. A few days later, Amara received a call from Tom, the event supervisor. "You need to come to the warehouse, now." When she arrived, her heart sank. The decorations for the charity fair were destroyed. Balloons popped, banners, shredded tables overturned. It wasn't an accident. Someone had sabotaged everything. Tom avoided her eyes. "The board thinks maybe it's better if you step back. Too much attention. Too many distractions." Amara's chest tightened. "You're firing me temporarily," Tom said weakly, "just until things calm down." She left the warehouse shaking with fury. For years she'd fought to prove herself to stand tall despite whispers and stares. And now, after pouring her heart into this event, they wanted her gone because she had dared to love the wrong man. That evening she stormed into the Monroe mansion where Eleanor sat sipping tea in the garden. "They sabotaged everything," Amara burst out. "And now they're punishing me for it." Eleanor set her cup down, her eyes flashing. Those cowards. The fair was supposed to be for the kids, Amara said, her voice breaking. Now they'll cancel it or turn it into another boring dinner. And I can't. You won't let that happen, Eleanor interrupted, rising to her feet. Neither will I. Amara blinked. But we don't have supplies. Or approval. Or Eleanor smiled sharply. What we have is me. And my friends. And this house. Within hours, the Monroe mansion transformed into a command center. Eleanor's society circle arrived in droves, women in pearls, rolling up their sleeves, unloading car trunks filled with balloons, streamers, baked goods. They worked like a construction crew fueled by indignation and champagne. Amara directed the chaos astonished as she watched Eleanor on a ladder tying streamers, or Margaret, 60 years old and elegant, blowing up balloons with a hand pump. You're making miracles, Amara whispered. Eleanor smirked. No, dear. You are. We're just your backup singers. By dawn, the Monroe Gardens looked like a Wonderland tents, games, art displays, a stage lit with fairy lights. When families began to arrive later that morning, children ran wide-eyed into the transformed space. Laughter and music filled the air louder than any whisper of scandal. And as Amara stood in the center of it all, Malik on her hip and Eleanor at her side, she realized something powerful. This wasn't survival anymore. This was standing. The gardens still glowed from the echoes of the fair strings of light swaying in the evening breeze, paper lanterns drifting like low-hanging stars. The last of the families had left hours ago, but laughter lingered in the air, a memory etched into the Monroe estate. Amara stood beneath an arch of flowers watching Malik chase fireflies across the lawn with two of his new friends. For once, she didn't worry about bills or stairs or ceilings that leaked. She let herself breathe. Daniel approached quietly, his suit jacket slung over one shoulder, his tie loosened. He stopped beside her, following her gaze to Malik. He looks happy. Amara smiled softly. He is. Tonight wasn't just a party. It was proof. Proof of what? That joy belongs everywhere, she said, even in places that try to lock it out. Daniel nodded, his expression serious. Then, without warning, he turned to the small stage where the kids had performed earlier. He picked up the microphone, tapped it, and addressed the volunteers still cleaning up. Everyone his voice carried across the lawn. I have an announcement. The chatter stilled. Amara froze. As of today, Amara Johnson is no longer just a coordinator for Monroe Associates, Daniel declared. She is the executive director of the Parker Monroe Foundation. Independent, fully funded, dedicated to creating opportunities for children who need them most. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Amara's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel, she whispered. He looked directly at her, his voice steady. This is your vision, Amara. You built it. You showed me what change looks like when it's real. Now it belongs to you. Applause erupted, echoing across the gardens. Malik dashed up to the stage, beaming. Does that mean Mommy's the boss? Daniel laughed, crouching to his level. Yes, she's the boss. Malik puffed out his chest proudly. Good, because she's the best boss. Eleanor stood at the edge of the crowd, smiling with quiet triumph. For once, her son hadn't just followed tradition, he had broken it. Weeks later, the Parker Monroe Foundation held its official opening in a modest building downtown. The sign gleamed above the doors, Malik's crayon rocket drawing, framed in the lobby as its unofficial emblem. The press came again, of course, but this time Amara didn't flinch. She stood at the podium in a simple dress, her voice clear. This foundation isn't about charity dinners or photo ops. It's about children. Their art, their dreams, their futures. Too often they're told they don't belong in certain rooms. We're here to break those doors open. Daniel watched from the front row, pride swelling in his chest. Afterward, Malik tugged his sleeve. Daddy, does this mean Mommy's famous now? Daniel smiled. It means she's unstoppable. Months passed, and with them came something Amara had almost forgotten: peace. She and Daniel were planning a small wedding, nothing like the society affairs of the past. Malik insisted on being ring captain, promising to march down the aisle with Buzz Lightyear as backup. On the morning of the ceremony, Amara stood before a mirror in a simple white dress, her grandmother adjusting the hem. You look radiant, child, Helen said, her eyes misty. Amara laughed nervously. "I'm terrified." "Good," Helen replied. "Only fools aren't terrified of love. The brave ones love anyway." Outside the park was filled with people, executives in pressed suits, sitting beside children from the community center. Eleanor chatting warmly with Amara's neighbors, strangers and friends, all mingling as if no walls had ever divided them. The music began. Malik led the way, proudly, pillow in hand, his grin brighter than the sun. Amara walked alone, her steps steady, her heart pounding. Daniel waited at the small arch draped in wildflowers, his eyes fixed only on her. When she reached him, he whispered, "Hi." She laughed through her tears. "Hi." The officiant spoke words about unity and courage, but Amara barely heard them. All she felt was Daniel's hand in hers, warm and certain. "I promise," Daniel said, his voice trembling, "to never doubt you again, to stand with you against every storm, to be not just Malik's father, but his partner in adventure, and to build a world where love breaks every line drawn against us." Amara's reply came clear and strong. "I promise to keep laughing with you even when the world tries to silence us, to protect this family we've built, and to remind you that joy belongs to everyone, especially us." When they sealed their vows with a kiss, cheers erupted, children blowing bubbles that floated like tiny blessings across the park. Malik ran into their arms, shouting, "Now we're a real family." Daniel scooped him up. "We always were," he said. That evening, as the sun set over Boston, Amara looked around at the celebration, at Eleanor laughing with Grandma Helen, at Malik chasing fireflies with his new cousins, at Daniel smiling at her with a gentleness that still startled her. For the first time, she didn't feel like a guest in someone else's world. She felt like the architect of her own. And as the first stars blinked into the sky, Amara realized the truth: she hadn't just found love. She had built a foundation stronger than wealth, stronger than prejudice, stronger than fear, a foundation of family, a new foundation that would stand.